Thank you for joining us today. I apologize for the lateness of getting this started. We had a few technological issues to work out, but they appear to be worked out now. A subject that I have not addressed all that much here at the SMOTUS report, though I hope to correct that in the near future, is reproductive rights. We are now 4 years past the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs. That, of course, reversed the Roe v. Wade decision, essentially ending a federal right to abortion that had existed for 50 years. In that time, we've seen states move in some very different directions. Some of them are seeking to protect or even expand reproductive freedoms. Others are making abortion difficult or impossible or dangerous or outright illegal to obtain. Democratic politicians today talk vaguely about what they want to do, whether that means codifying Roe or reversing Dobbs or something else. These plans are often kind of illusory. Just what should the reproductive rights community be doing right now in this environment to help answer these questions? I have a great guest with us today to talk about this exact issue. Folks, this is Karen Middleton. Karen Middleton leads Cobalt Advocates, a Colorado organization that advances abortion access and reproductive rights. Middleton has been with Cobalt since 2013. Karen and I actually first met years ago when she was a Colorado State legislator and an MA student in higher education at the University of Denver. She's also led Emerge America, which trains women to run for office. And she has taught courses at Metro State University in Denver, as well as the University of Colorado School of Public Affairs. Karen, welcome to the SMOTUS Report.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I have a couple of questions I'd love to just dig into, and we'll see what kind of time we have. So you had a recent article in Colorado Newsline, and I'll put a link to that in when I publish this. In this article, you make the provocative argument that reproductive rights advocates shouldn't be aiming to, quote unquote, restore Roe. As you note, the system of abortion access that emerged following the Roe v. Wade movement in the early 1970s had a lot of weaknesses. It had a lot of patchiness to it. Rather, as you argue, post-Dobbs, advocates should be seeking something beyond, something more ambitious than Roe. Can you give us an idea what that would look like?
Yes, absolutely. I think that the movement writ large really viewed Roe v. Wade as good enough, but it really wasn't. I think about the moment, when I started at this organization and we were formerly NARAL, we had a Supreme Court that had never ruled really and not much of a negative ruling on abortion. They went a little bit down the road, but for the most part, the right to privacy stood. But there had been an opportunity when we had Obama in the White House, we had Nancy Pelosi as speaker, we had the control of the chambers, that we could have passed a federal law, for example, that would have gone further to protect the right to access abortion. There are model laws that have been sitting out there for the last several cycles. But we always hesitate. We, the movement, always hesitated, always thought, oh, if we don't mention it, and meanwhile, the opposition has been really bound and determined. There's a great book called The Fall of Roe that I recommend to anybody that really shows the movement and kind of what happened and what didn't from both sides from about 2012 to 2022. And I think that now we have to look back to see what we didn't do and move forward and say, let's protect the access to reproductive rights that we should have in the first place. It needs to be in federal law. The law needs to be same across the country. The fact that one of the craziest cases is if you're in North Dakota, you can't get an abortion. If you're in Minnesota, you can. Well, if you put your kayak in the middle of the river between those two borders, one side, abortion available, other side, no abortion. That's crazy. And think about any other aspect of healthcare. We do not have these kinds of arbitrary rules around other types of care, but abortion has really been in the sightlines for a long time. And I think we need to settle it by putting it into law and not relying on the courts. And we need to go further in protecting the full spectrum of reproductive health care, including abortion, and stick with it.
So I'm curious, is this an agenda basically for the next Congress. That is, there's a pretty decent chance the House is going to flip Democratic in this November's elections. The Senate is a harder call to make. But are you essentially pushing this agenda now at the federal level?
I mean, until 2028 is passed, I don't see us really being able to do anything. The Women's Health Protection Act has been lingering about for years now. There's also a move to overturn the Hyde Amendment, which is so harmful, and that's federal dollars for abortion care. The Helms Amendment, we have a gag rule, and we're actually defunding both domestic and global efforts to protect abortion and pay for it if we need to. So those bills have all been sitting out there. I don't know that the next Congress could do much without the presidency. So I would say,
Mm.
sure, we need to keep having the conversation. And that's, I think, another important piece is that I think in Colorado sometimes think, oh, we're good. We've checked that box. We're never good. We have an anti-abortion ballot measure out collecting signatures as we speak. Really, nobody ever stops. And I think sometimes we sort of hope, gosh, if we could pass this one thing, we would be done. So, yes, I think we need to keep running it. I don't think we can pass it without change in the White House.
Mm. So you've been, let me see if I'm quoting you correctly on this, but you've been critical in the past of those taking a more moderate stance on abortion rights and access, suggesting that there's those who've taken kind of a middle path over the years, saying, they should criticize abortion while seeking to protect basic rights. You've argued that essentially that's making the situation worse. If I'm understanding you correctly, I'm hoping could you expand a little bit on this?
Absolutely. Colorado was really unique. I feel like we're the petri dish of this issue in a lot of ways because we have faced abortion on the ballot since the recent run was really since '08. And I sat in national spaces where people would say, well, you can't say abortion at the door. That will freak people out. Well, in fact, we have been saying it at the door. People know exactly what's on the ballot, and they have consistently voted to say, no, we don't want to regulate this issue. No, we don't want government in our business. The polling has shown the same, but I think people have been hesitant. And right now in the national landscape, there are people who are saying, oh, if we just didn't talk about abortion, this wouldn't be a problem. Well, not only do I disagree, I would also use the 2024 elections as an example that people went from, oh my gosh, let's not say abortion to, gosh, that worked really well in Ohio in 23. Let's run abortion ballot measures in every state with a Senate race and let's see what happens. Well, the fact of the matter is that we know that voters across the political spectrum vote to protect abortion. That doesn't mean they're going to vote. In fact, in 2014, No on 67 was an anti-abortion ballot measure, and it was defeated, and Cory Gardner was elected. And that's because
Mhm.
we know there are people who are Republicans or unaffiliated voters that might vote for a Republican elected official, but will vote to keep abortion restrictions out of our Constitution or our statutes. So I think it's really what we have done is we spent about 10 years working with a whole coalition, talking about abortion, destigmatizing everything from communications in the media to fighting bills. We didn't just go fight bills in the Capitol. We made sure everybody knew we were doing it, and that was by design. We wanted you to know what elected officials were thinking, what they were saying. One of my favorite press conferences was probably in 2015 or 16, where I was waving a transvaginal ultrasound wand around so that you knew when people said they wanted to mandate a transvaginal ultrasound, what the heck they were talking about. And it wasn't my favorite line is a jelly on the belly type of mainstream television version. I mean,
Mhm.
they're actually putting something inside you. And until you internalize that, you don't think about it. And what I was most surprised by in 2020 is the Win 15 measure, abortion after 22 weeks. They really thought they had us, right? We were all locked down during COVID, and we were out talking to rural voters, conservative voters, Republican voters, and to a person, they did not believe in passing that ballot measure. And I was personally surprised, but it also, to me, just brought home the fact that that Western values, government out of my business thing that John Love signed originally in 1967, a Republican governor, really matters to the people in Colorado, and we've been talking about it. So I do think if you're talking about it, showing what's happening, talking about the what could happen if we don't protect this access, it matters. And I think in many parts of the country, it's been a gosh, if we don't say anything, we'll be good kind of vibe. And that just doesn't work. You really do need to
Mhm.
be out front.
I wanted to ask you just on something you were just talking about the effect on elections. Um, the midterm elections in 2022. That was an election cycle in which Democrats, I think, pretty broadly did better than expected, like better than a lot of the forecast models and a lot of pundits expected them to do. Actually, increased their hold on the Senate, didn't lose very much ground in the House. One of the stories to explain that was this was a reaction to Dobbs. That is, a lot of people, even some moderates, even some Republicans who were not happy with that decision and wanted to protect abortion rights, showed up and were angry and showed up to vote. Do you get an impression, is that sort of voter anger still there? Is that backlash still present in 2024 and in 2026?
I think it depends. I think
Hmm.
people who are our supporters and people who we communicate with, which is a fairly significant number of voters who we've been in, essentially in a relationship with. They hear from us, we communicate with them. They may be paying attention to it as a priority vote, but honestly, it's the same economic job insecurity, cost of
Hmm.
living, which, by the way, there's lots of talk about whether you can afford to have children, right? So abortion is an economic issue in many ways, but I don't think it is necessarily the first thing on someone's mind. It might be, I can't afford to stay in my house. I can't afford to my car payment. I can't afford to fill my gas tank. I'm living on the edge. And if you're living on the edge, having access to abortion in an economically difficult time makes a lot of sense, but it may not be the first thing folks are thinking about. I do think that, in fact, we were pressured to run that ballot measure in 2022 because it seemed like it would be the sweet spot. And then people were frustrated that we waited until 2024. But, we felt it was very important for the community to be with us and the people organizing to do the work on their schedule and not on a political schedule. And I would argue that the 2024 elections, with all of those abortion ballot measures, really told the story that in states where um, folks were already talking about this issue was important. It made sense to the folks who actually were on the ground. In some cases, people helicoptered in and ran those ballot measures without including the community, and the results weren't what we wanted.
Hmm. So you were touching before a little bit on Colorado's position in all this and how Colorado's had a somewhat more maximalist position on abortion rights, protecting abortion rights throughout a pregnancy. You've argued that that's really the proper approach. Notably, Colorado has remained a haven for pregnant women seeking options in other states in the region, throughout the plains, throughout the Rockies, even some southern states. Is this a model, do you think, some other states could follow?
Yes. We are not alone in this. New Mexico is
Mhm.
another state that has very similar protections and has expanded. Honestly, we're all suffering from the fact that Texas, which is such a large population state, has been so restrictive on abortion. Half the patients we take care of through our abortion fund, which has exploded to just under $2.5 million last year. Of the out of state patients, about half of them come from out of state. 82% of them were Texas. So Texas has sort of overwhelmed the system. I think I see two things. One is, yes, developing more havens and helping other states expand the care that they can provide, as Colorado has. Also, fight for all 50 states to get this basic right back, because it is insanity. I go back to my, standing in the middle of the river. Um, Between two states, and one state is okay and the other one is not. And it's not fair, because not everybody can figure out even how to access an abortion if that's something they're interested in. They don't have the information. They don't feel like they can travel. They don't know all of their options. And the laws going back and forth create a lot of fear and uncertainty, and that's the point. Wyoming is a great example of that. Texas is a great example of that.
Okay. Um, I wanted to ask you about the drug mifepristone. Mifepristone, sometimes called RU-486. Uh, this has, to my understanding, been really a game changer in reproductive rights. It's allowed many women to have access to abortion care via telehealth, essentially at home. Um, I know there are efforts afoot in states and nationally to ban that medication. The Supreme Court is, for the moment, keeping it legal, to my understanding. I was hoping you could sort of explain where that issue is now, what your expectations are going forward.
This is another effort of a movement that's been dogged for so many years. And the fact that abortion is simpler to access. It is not something that requires as much time or money. It's easier for you to do at home. Just pisses off the conservatives, right? That is the idea that you can control something. It is actually part of a two-drug regimen. So mifepristone and misoprostol together are considered sort of the ideal. If you're undergoing that type of an abortion, and it makes it so simple to get to people. So that has been a real target. And it's obviously a political target because the same judge in the same district has been fighting and trying to push back on these rules. We are concerned, but we also know a couple of things. One is you can um, successfully do abortions with just misoprostol. Um, it's not as good, but it's not as good as an experience for the patient. It is medically going to do exactly the same thing. And so there's always a target, right? They're going after something they think they can go after. I am worried about just the fact that if there's one more political win, what does that mean in terms of the rights movement? I mean, we are seeing new laws attempted all the time across the states, from lawyers for fetuses to requiring burials. This is a big deal. But the thing about mifepristone is it has really taken the control to the people on the ground, right? People can do self-managed abortion. Telehealth can provide it. You can make a decision. We're also of the mind that you should have the option. So for some people, going through a medication abortion procedure in the comfort of their home or somewhere they are makes great sense. For other folks, having a procedure that you might be in and out in 20 minutes and back on a plane, and the abortion is completed, may work better if you've got to get back to a job. I mean, this is similar to experiencing a miscarriage. It's not necessarily pleasant or easy, but this is something that people who have babies know and kind of just live with. But I feel like it's one more way to try to take control away, to try to both criminalize and hospitalize and say it must be done this way. Think about the trap laws, right? There were targeted regulations against abortion providers. They're still going on, where they wanted to make you like an emergency room, ambulatory surgical center, and require you to do all of these things. This is kind of the other end of it, right? We want to regulate the easiest thing that helps people, make it easier, faster, more comfortable. We're going to take that away from you. So it is really a cruel measure and a very
Mm,
political measure. I don't know if they will be successful. I think that look, they banned Planned Parenthood federal dollars for 1 year, and they weren't able to extend that. So I think the chinks in the armor are breaking down with other crises happening at the federal level, and I'm hoping that they slow their roll. This is not popular. The president is not particularly interested in focusing on this from what we can see. And that's good, right? Let him focus on all the other terrible things he's doing. But I find that there's a mixed bag there, and that may help us.
mm. Um, on another piece of legislation, I wanted to ask you about the Freedom of Access to Clinics Act, or the FACE Act.
Hmm.
The FACE Act, this is a law enacted, I believe, in 1994 to protect people seeking care at abortion clinics, to protect them from harassment or threats or physical attacks. The Trump administration, to my understanding, the Department of Justice is basically not enforcing this act anymore. Their argument is that this is an example of the law being weaponized against conservatives. Um, Now, as I understand it, some states, including Colorado, are trying to create and enforce such laws at the state level. Can you describe the status of that and what's been going on in the states?
Absolutely. In 20, and I'll just use a corollary example. In 2025, we helped pass an EMTALA bill, which protected emergency
Mm,
access to abortion in Colorado, that really dovetail with the federal administration removing those protections. And the most visual example I can give is the folks in Idaho, pregnant women in Idaho, helicoptered out to another state to get the care they needed
mm,
because they were experiencing a pregnancy crisis. With the FACE Act, we have the federal government refusing to enforce something. So we're looking to the state to recreate that. We are seeing increased violence and threats and national groups coming in and targeting abortion clinics in Colorado. What's interesting is a lot of times they are imported, right? White rose resistance is from somewhere else. And they are targeting areas outside of the Denver metro. So Boulder and Pueblo are two areas where we have clinics that we're concerned about. And so putting those protections in and ramping those up. And we're hearing that from the providers and the patients who want a safe experience. And frankly, here in the metro area, there are abortion clinics not far from where I live, and nobody is protesting them. There might be two, there might be nobody. There are occasionally, Planned Parenthood still sees them at their main headquarters, but a lot of the other clinics that we work with do not have the same kind of resistance. So we know that as we see more care provided outside of this part of the metro area, that we need to increase those protections and we need to make it a safe environment for everyone. We also need to know, I think people, regardless of where you are on this issue, do we really want people from out of state coming in and telling us how to do our work?
mhm,
And there are dangers, right? There's a history of there were targeted assassinations of abortion providers, the most recent being in 2009 in um, Kansas. So
mm. Okay. You hear me okay? Okay,
I
good.
think maybe my earbuds just died. So I'm going to.
Oh, near. Okay. um, I was hoping just to sort of take a step back, if you could give us a sense of basically what we know about the state of reproductive care across the US in the 4 years since Dobbs. That is, compared to our expectations about what might happen, what have we learned about access to abortions, about unwanted pregnancies, about maternal health? What's been worse than expected? What's been better than expected? Do you have a sense of the lessons so far over the last 4 years?
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest one is just a reminder that people have been having abortions for as long as history has been around. And there was some suggestion that somehow this would stop abortion, and it has not. In fact, the rates of abortion have increased. And part of the reason I think that's the case is that in the wake of the conflict, right, that more people were aware that abortion was available, that states like ours that had the ability to provide abortion have expanded. So I still remember in those first days after the Dobbs decision, our volume tripled with people calling us overnight. And we know the clinics were overwhelmed. But what happened? Well, telehealth providers came to Colorado. Abortion providers, OBGYNs, trained in other states, moved here, sometimes under cover of night, to do their work here. We have a board member who's been on the record, moved from Texas probably about less than 2 years ago, talking about the only difference between what she was doing at home and what she's doing here was that she didn't have to call a lawyer. That literally every time they saw a patient, they had to worry about the legal implications, and that she feels like she's helping people that she would have not been able to help in Texas. So I see clinics are expanding in areas where they can. I think that the movement has been very nimble in terms of abortion funds have expanded and have met the demand. The idea of travel funds was brand new for us. We had we spent $6,000 around COVID doing practical support, which really meant delivering meals to people because no restaurants were open and groceries were limited in those early days of COVID. We now are spending half of what we bring in to there's abortion funds, so actual care and then practical support. So we are now a mini travel agency, and that has been something that across the country, everybody dialed it up. The role of navigator, something of a new role, but we now help people all the way along. And I think hospitals have expanded access to care in a way that they didn't before. Some realized that they needed to take this on. In a state like ours where Medicaid is now available, that has made a change. And we see other access states also expanding access to care. Illinois is a good example. New Mexico is another good example. And then I think when you look at Wyoming, it's on again, off again. And that back and forth has really caused a lot of harm. So there was a court, they've had laws pass and then there's an injunction. They've had decisions that allow abortions to continue. Then they had a governor who ran a bill. And that uncertainty is one of the things that I think is a negative for folks everywhere. They don't know if abortion is legal in their state. I mean, even before all of this, we had stories of people who were really just trying to have a baby, right? They are well into their pregnancy and they suddenly find out something is wrong. And they then learn the only place they can come to is Colorado. So before Dobbs, we were one of the places you came when you ran into trouble and you hoped to have that family and you couldn't. And Colorado was the safety valve. So I think it's really a balancing act right now, but I would say that the folks have risen to the occasion and we're not going anywhere. And we're going to keep fighting to make sure people who want access to this care get it and that they get the information they need.
That's fascinating how much of your work is focused on travel. And I'm curious because I know a number of states have talked about or are trying to enforce travel bans, essentially, for women seeking abortion care.
Mm-hmm.
Um, can you give us an idea of that's something that certainly doesn't sound constitutional, though God knows with this current Supreme Court. What's the status of that? Where has that is that something that's been enforced? Where are we seeing that sort of issue come up?
Well, it's one of the issues you see talked about a lot in the press, but there's a lot of talk and not a lot of action. Yes, there was a rogue Texas law enforcement officer using flock to track somebody. There was a case of, I think it was a boyfriend in Texas who wanted to sue everybody because his girlfriend was able to leave and have an abortion. And so there's been very limited efforts to test the law. I will also tell you, I have a lot of unhappy attorneys who raise their hand to volunteer, hoping against hope to have a really good case and push back on these. And there haven't been enough cases for them to really take on. There are some. And I think our SHIELD law is one reason we passed that in 23 is we protect patients, providers, and assisters. So we will, I kind of feel like we're the Star Wars shield. The shield is up. So if you can get here, and yes, we are helping people to come from wherever they need help. But, it's the advantage of being a reproductive rights organization. So we've got lots of access to law and policy and an abortion fund. So we feel like we can say, try me, because I'm not going to stop helping these people and they're going to keep coming. I know that states are trying. The other place they tried was with medication abortion and mailing medication from New York to Louisiana. And that's been a case where they were trying to extradite the doctor. Our response was to change labeling practices in our SHIELD law in 2025 to make sure that couldn't happen here. It doesn't have the name of the doctor. It has the name of the clinic. And that was a change in response to what they were attempting. I think we're very concerned about the digital security and privacy. There was a case a couple of years ago where this was all kind of in right-wing land, that a 14-year-old was coming for an abortion against her will. This was their narrative, and that they were coming to every clinic and papering the doors and looking for the 14-year-old and saying they were going to save them and that the parents were doing this. And we don't know if the story was true or false, but it was fomenting the drama and really trying to engage people in this idea that we're going to track you somewhere. We haven't seen any real evidence of that. And I think a lot of it is smoke and mirrors more than actual litigation at this point. That doesn't mean people don't live in fear. That is their point. They want you to be afraid to take any action other than what they think you should be doing. And by the way, these are the same people that don't want birth control. They don't want women to vote. It's like the whole list. It is not just this one issue, but it makes it easier for them to think that this issue will scare someone into changing their behavior. And the fact of the matter is, most people have not.
Mm. I wanted to ask you my impression on sort of abortion politics at the national level is that Republicans don't talk about it as much as they used to. Certainly, Republican presidential candidates, members of Congress, since Dobbs, they were very obsessed on reversing Roe v. Wade. And now they seem much more internally divided on where they should go next, on whether they should say, oh, hey, we achieved our goal. This is a state issue now, versus we should be pushing for a national ban on abortion. But they seem to think that that kind of divides them and their voters, and they don't talk about it as much. Democrats possibly talking about it more than they used to. How do you see those politics developing? Is this still a motivator among Democrats? Is this an awkward thing for Republicans? Where's the state of national politics on this?
I mean, I think it's pretty awkward for Republicans, and that's not a new story. See Cory Gardner. I mean, that was the same thing where he would put his name on certain bills in D.C. and not talk about it at home because he knew it wasn't popular here, right? He also saw that split. He got reelected in 2014, and No on 67 failed. So I see that. I remember talking to the last person who was part of the pro-choice Republican group in Colorado who had moved out of state, and that group nationally disbanded. It used to be that there were Republicans for choice, and I know some of the folks that used to lead that, they're around, but they have really, many of them have left that party, but they don't see it in the same way. I think Republicans know that this is a loser for them. I mentioned a book called The Fall of Roe because it was two New York Times reporters who followed this issue. And in 2012, the Republican Party had given up on this issue, but it was some of the true believers who are really dedicated to this who brought it back to life and who really felt that they could use it as a strategy to win elections. And it kind of tells the story of that. And I think that there are people who are pushing. So right now, the expiration of Planned Parenthood's ban, they're hearing from constituents and people who are upset. That is a very vocal, very highly organized minority. And so they are getting flack, but they also saw it wasn't going to go forward. It's a losing issue, and they're staying away from it. Democrats have not. I think in Colorado, we've really spent a lot of time with the elected officials that we work with to really say how important this is. We've had a few Republicans over the years that have supported this issue around the edges, right? We've got folks who have supported long-acting reversible contraception because they saw how it worked in their rural communities. And we had some examples, but I think I was a legislator and I had Republican friends who were pro-choice who said, I cannot say that or vote that way, or I will not stay in my seat. So they did not feel like they had any option if they were a member of that party and elected. And that was something I heard more than once, and from both men and women. And it was interesting. So I think Republican voters consistently in Colorado have said, no, you're not going to tell me what to do. And that's been the upstanding message. I think we could help other elected officials in other states do better. There are groups that are working across states. I think storytelling, I think people talking to their constituents, talking to their elected officials really helps because it brings that personal story. And that is always such a powerful method. And I think that's something that across the states, it's a good way for people to say no. How that will affect the next election, I'm not sure. I think that's still to be seen. But I do think that we're seeing it play out in real time. And I think Colorado is a model, and we try to share how we've done what we do here as a way to help other folks that are trying to move the electorate, because that's really what we're about.
Thanks. So that kind of concludes the questions I had for you. What haven't I asked you about that we should be discussing?
Who's going to run for president in 28? No, I'm not.
Okay. Everybody? I think everybody is the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think I'm curious thinking about the way I'm approaching it and what you're seeing on the national landscape around folks who are trying to move away from abortion and say it's too scary. I mean, what advice would you give me, or what advice would you give some of those? It's really the pundits more than anyone else at this point who are saying, oh, we just shouldn't talk about it again. I'd be curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, I think my thoughts are similar to yours. That there perpetually on the Democratic side, there's this divide, right, between people who think that the party should advocate for the things that its members care about, and those that are always terrified of offending the one key working class person in Wisconsin that's going to tip the next presidential election. And I don't know what exactly the right thing is, but my impression, at least to me, the lesson of 2022 was that there is a wellspring of voters, not just Democrats, who are really bothered by the erosion of abortion rights, and are really concerned about it, and that's actually a voting issue for them. And they'll show up and turn out if that issue is salient, if that issue is being discussed. But yeah, I mean, it's not a guaranteed winner, but it does seem to be important to a very large chunk of the electorate.
I would agree. Yeah, it's an interesting time. I also think that the other sort of tied to this is just some form of an equal rights amendment globally. We're one of the few places that doesn't really have equal rights. And when you think about the erosion of rights in so many other ways right now, this is one issue, but it's not the only one. The SAVE Act is a great example, where the idea that so many women change their names and they could automatically lose the right to vote without realizing it unless they go through a lot of hoops. That's pretty scary. And that's been on the horizon. This is the second time it's been out there in as many years. So that's worrisome.
Mm. Karen, thank you so much for joining me today in this discussion. Where can people follow you and the work you're doing?
So Cobalt Advocates, you can find us on Instagram. Our website is cobaltadvocates.org. You can find me on Instagram. I think it's just my name. And we have a newsletter you can get, but we try to keep pretty up to date on our Instagram feed, and maybe look for us soon on Substack. Now that you have me here, I might have to do a little more.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. This has been a really informative conversation today. I've really enjoyed chatting with you about all this.
Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it.
And thanks to everyone who tuned in. All right. We'll talk to you soon, and I'll be posting this in the next couple of days. All right.
Great.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.